So let me introduce myself. My name is Rahul. I'm from the Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore, and we have one student here, Radhika. She's also from Bangalore. You will see I am called the HP Chair Professor. I just want to clarify, I am not employed by HP. I am employed by IIMB Bangalore, so I may not be able to repair your HP laptop or printers, just in case if you have any problems with it. I do work in ICT for development, and that's the chair I have to work on that. And today, Siraj said, well, give a talk on broad issues. I did not have a specific mandate, so I'm going to pull up a lot of issues which I have been running into my research over the last about decade or so, and present them to you. This is an overview of the field the way I see it, and I think it may overlap somewhat with the way you are viewing it, but the overlap may not be entirely complete. I have a cough, and I have a cold also. I think one of my ears is gone, but feel free to ask questions. I have 1 hour, so that's quite a lot. I can't talk for 1 hour. I'm not doing a PowerPoint. This is a PDF.
Okay.
I only work in open source, so I will not do. Of course, you can do LibreOffice slides. So these are all prepared in LibreOffice, and I put them in PDF. So what will I do? I will try to come up with at least some pointers to what will be the basic research problem, and look at some of the origins of ICT for development, and then really get into what I think are the social political issues which are really of substance that are most important. And I will speak very strongly from the Indian perspective, which is what I've looked at most closely, and perhaps it will resonate with you. I have some things to say about methodology, and this resonates again with something that came up in the EGOV conference yesterday, and Mong and I were in this talk about how you approach data, how you approach data collection, how you talk to people. So those hopefully will be 2 or 3 messages that I can convey to you. And well, I have an hour. Let's see how much I can manage. So what is the basic research problem? And the fundamental premise of ICT for D is in the first dash point, which is ICT leads to development. And I'm italicizing development because that in itself is a highly contested term. Exactly what constitutes development is a big debate. Perhaps people are not in agreement. Certainly the theorists, if you read carefully from the whole range of theorists who talk about development, there is no agreement. Very little agreement. There's certain basic issues of on which people agree, the rest of them disagree very strongly. Now, one of the properties of ICTs is that it increases reach and access. And with the growing penetration of networks, and particularly mobile, voice, and data networks, the access is increasing at an incredible pace. And there is a belief that it will lead to this amelioration of certain deprivations such as food and income facilities for healthcare, education, and so on. This is the faith on which ICT for T is built. This is what we believe. We may not articulate it in such concrete terms. So that's what we believe. It's going to lead to this. And that in itself is sometimes problematic because you have to question how is it possible to even achieve such things, and why are we focusing on such things as opposed to others in this area area of research. Of course, this is well known. ICTs include systems, information systems as we know it, so basically data processing, applications, and of course it also includes these two, telephony and radio and television. I think this covers the ground. Today more and more devices are emerging which will not fall under any of these categories, but they will constitute some, at least some of the elements of ICT. Okay. They won't exactly, because RFID chips, for instance, don't fall into any of these categories. Maybe they use radio signals, but they are also beginning to have an impact. So that's the artifact part and the device part. Now, what's the problem here? The problem, and again I'm saying this from the Indian context, but I think it can be generalized. Largely there have been huge failures in the Indian context. India is supposedly a superpower in IT. Well, there are a lot of engineers who do IT in India, in Bangalore, the city I come from. However, the number of failed projects far exceeds the number of successful builds. So what's wrong? Why can't we do this? Why can't we get it right? Technology is very good. People know how to work with it. Why is it that they still fail? And they fail relentlessly. Telecenters is one example where the Indian government, following examples of failed projects around the world, went in and rolled out 100,000 telecenters across the country, one for each village. Guess what? 80% of them are not successful. They don't meet basic requirements. They're not able to sustain. They're shut down. People are selling cooking oil and slippers and brooms in these telecenter kiosks, but they don't work as ICT kiosks. There are some very few successes. E-government has there are some successes that we can talk about. However, the failures again far exceed the successes. It's not enough to justify the incredible amounts of money that's pouring into ICT for development. Now, one thing I say in my classes, Radhika's heard this also, I'll say it to you guys also. In India, companies like HP and IBM and Toshiba, Dell, their investments in the last 10 years, they're not investments, the revenues has been practically doubling every 6 months. So they make huge money. Most of it is they are selling to the government. So the government in India is pouring in billions of dollars into information technology. And there is a forced mandate, you must spend. Bureaucrats, officials are given targets, spending targets. You have to spend so much money. And they're spending it. So if you need to use a laptop for something and you have a spending budget, you say, well, what's the point? This laptop I can spend one fraction of it. Let me go buy a blade server to do what I would have done with the laptop. So I'm saying this in a lighter tone. However, that is the situation in many cases. A lot of spending going on, and there is hardly any justification. Mobile penetration rates are growing at a massive pace. Everybody knows this. In many cases, people haven't figured out what to do with it, except of course the GSM and the telecom providers who have figured out how to extract massive revenues from it. Now, so why do these projects fail? I mean, as researchers and as PhD students, we need problems to work on. So this is a good problem. Why do these projects fail? What is the cause of this failure? Exactly what is failure or success in this case? Can we define it? When I use the word failure, am I sure of what I'm saying? Why is it fail? Why did it fail? There are researchers who have some theorizing on this. What do you mean by development? Uh, as I said, this is a highly contested terrain. Most people look for per capita income improvements. If per capita income goes up, that means development has been achieved. Is this correct? Of course, there are contending theories there also. And very importantly, MIS as a field has been around for about 50 years, 40, 50 years. And what can we learn from MIS? MIS people have been building up theories, doing a lot of very detailed work. And I found when I started looking into this, that very few of the, for instance, EGOV researchers were familiar with what had been going on in MIS for a very long time. Of course, now they've caught up and the fields have emerged quite a bit. But is there work already out there in MIS that can help us answer some of these questions? So, that was on basic research. Please feel free to ask anything any point. I think you don't have to wait.
So, one question. I'm working next to my PhD studies in ICT for higher education in the Netherlands. And my background is healthcare and all these things. I've seen ICT projects failing all the time in developed countries as well.
Yeah.
Do you see similarities with IT projects occurring in developed countries and with these projects? I mean, do we really have to focus only on ICT for D to see why projects fail? Or could we take the broader perspective? Because there are things which are, let's say, in a broader perspective, which are the root cause of project failure in essence. And shouldn't we take that picture and then see this as a subsphere, a subset of project failure?
Good question. I have to say no. I think you have to focus on, see, the developing countries and the developed countries, there is no, in a sense, there are some commonalities, but the particular local context is very important, and it plays a very definite role in the success of any of the projects. So, can I look at Norway and some projects which, Mong and his colleagues have been looking at and learn something from it? Yeah, maybe a few things. And that's what's being done. If you look at the example, it's one of my favorites. India is going through this, what is called the unique ID project. They want a unique ID number for 1.2 billion people.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, tough job. So what do? They go look at UK. They look at Europe.
Netherlands,
Netherlands.
well.
UK also bombed. They look at USA and said, USA is very successful. We'll try to replicate that, or we'll try something. UK, it did not succeed. So I was watching the critics in India who are very critical of the UIDAI project in India, saying, oh, it didn't work in UK. And I'm saying, that's the same argument as saying it worked in UK, therefore it will work in India. It's the same as saying it didn't work in UK, therefore it works in India. Both, in my opinion, are wrong. Both are wrong. The complexities are immense, and the challenges are immense. And I will argue, even in a place like Bangladesh, Siraj disagrees with me a little bit on that. You walk, you cross 3 villages, there is a difference. You're walking into a certain different local context. And we've had discussions on this. So let me continue. That's a good question. We've got to keep that in mind. And I'm going to argue very strongly that local context matters much more. So, what are the origins of this famous problem, ICT for development? In fact, where did this phrase come from? If some of you read discourse theory, where did this discourse show up? Suddenly, why did it pop up on the agenda of various multilateral funding agencies? Earlier they used to worry about population and agriculture and women and so on. Suddenly ICT showed up. So what happened to population, agriculture and women? Well, this is the discourse way of looking at these problems. And one of the famous terms that showed up at the turn of the century literally is this thing called the digital divide. And this is some numbers and a graph I've picked up from, I think this is the ITU report, I have a source there, from 1997 to 2007. You can see this blue line, which is the developed world, which is running away at a massive pace, and the red line is the developing world, which is kind of running along, but not at that pace, and the world average is down there. So people immediately saw this as the big problem. We got to fix this. So there are many papers on let's fix the digital divide. We got to fix it. So there are many ways to. The people, of course, went and asked, what does it mean to have a digital divide? Why should we worry about this? And the answers are many, and there are. It's a mini industry in the academic domain to write papers on the digital divide. A lot has been said on it. Now here is another famous researcher, Hicks, whose paper in 2009 had a very good summary of the various influences in this discourse of ICT and development. You must be familiar with these, the internet in the 90s, and then the famous Millennium Development Goals of 2000. And I've actually done the study. I don't have the slide here. When I looked at the number of papers before 2000 and number of papers after 2000, and the difference is significant statistically. It's huge. So the number of papers just spikes after 2000, particularly in the early 2001, 2002, 3, 4, 5. It just jumps up. So it became a very prominent problem to study. And of course, if you are studying a prominent problem, the funding comes along with it. So the Millennium Development Goals supported a lot of research on ICT. Then there was a very famous World Development Report which actually fed into the Millennium Development Goals. And then there's this Digital Opportunities Task Force of the G8 countries, which got together and created this thing called ICT for Development. And there were two famous workshops, the World Society on Information Systems workshops in 2003 and 5. I think 5 was in Tunisia, where 2003 was. And
Geneva.
They created a...
No, it was in Geneva.
In Geneva, yeah. So these reports came out, and they were news. They were news. They made it to front pages of newspapers. And it created this a lot of language, terminology, words, problems, issues. They entered our everyday discourse. So we began to talk about something called digital divide, which we didn't talk about it before. So we began to talk about it. And by saying it frequently enough, I think it becomes a problem. So we said, okay, that's a problem. We got to fix it. Now, MDG, this is goal 8 from the MDG. 8.F says, in cooperation with the private sector, make available benefits of new technologies, especially in information communications, and make it available to all citizens of the world. Very different target, and the MDG was supposed to be achieved by 2015. So, because you have an MDG, as I mentioned, you also have a lot of funding that is tied to it, and it keeps coming. And sure enough, education institutions, non-government, non-profit institutions around the world, and also profit-making private institutions in the world said, okay, we're going to work on this problem, and we will be funded for it. Now, here is my little picture on what I think is the whole shebang. If you throw everything into that nice bag and put it up on a single PDF slide, this is what it will look like. So this is the mind map. ICT for D, the upper level bubbles are development here, ICT there, issues there, and under this you have access and all these types of kiosks and mapping and so on. And under development you have sense theory, which is like a counterpoint to a lot of the theories on development. There are a lot of controversies, and of course this things about asymmetry, bottom of the pyramid, deep blogging, and so on. All these things have been written about in the published literature, and then there are these very famous development targets, which have to do with all the good things. Am I missing something? Well, basically, microfinance is also being picked up. I think this little picture has, as far as I can tell, most of what it gets covered in ICT for development. Each of these, as you would know, is has a journal or several journals that are devoted to them. So there's a lot of activity in this field, and a lot of PhDs that can be written, a lot of papers that can be published. So that's where I am on my little picture and what the discourse is about. How am I doing on time? Not bad. Now, here are a series of social political issues which I will go into, and I will address his question, which is, why is it that we have to separate developing and developed? The local context is very important. And I will bring to you some research I've been doing in looking at the local context in various projects and various efforts, ICT efforts in India, particularly in India. Now, let's take the first one, conflict and resistance. Is there resistance to projects? Is there conflict related to projects? Do people who are being targeted for development, do they object to it? Do they say, no, we don't want this stuff? If people resist, why do they resist? What is the reason for it? Why is it that some people, when an e-government project in the state of Karnataka, where I come from, when it is being rolled out in 2001, why is it that some people go on a strike and say, we don't want this stuff? Why is it that in another state, a whole lot of employees also form a union and say, no, we're going to oppose this? Why is there conflict and resistance? Many cases, at least some of my findings, the answers are, there are certain big, huge gaps in stakeholder expectations. The stakeholders are those who are somehow affected by the system, positively or otherwise. They have certain expectations and they don't match. And so, if I may break it up into demand side and supply side expectations, they don't match. So there are no shared goals here. So you may want to build a system and people say, well, we don't share this goal. We don't agree that this is what we should achieve. Concretely, I've shown in some of my work that particularly in e-government systems, there is a huge, huge difference in what the expectations are, what we want the system to do. So there is a lot of conflict and resistance on the ground to such issues. What is the development context? What view of development do people have when they are building systems? One argument of development is, the simple one, is per capita income. If I target a certain region and bring in some projects, ultimately I would expect, and most economists will argue, that the income levels of people will rise. If it does not rise, it's a very clear answer. Your project has not achieved much. Even today, if you see the ICT literature, where people are mapping investments in IT, ICT, against what are they? If that is the independent variable, what is the dependent variable? It's invariably per capita income. GDP per capita income. Invariably. If that's not being affected, well, you have not achieved anything. And that is a questionable standard. Particularly if you take people like Amartya Sen, who said, now there are some other things that you have to look at. You have to look at development, what he calls freedoms. And the day before I was presenting a paper in the other conference on political freedoms. So political freedoms don't always map into increase in per capita income. They don't do so. However, Amartya Sen says that's important. If ICT can improve political freedom, does it achieve development? If ICT can enable, as we all know, people in Tahrir Square to organize and throw out a government, or do the same thing in the Philippines and throw out a president, does it achieve development? It may not necessarily increase per capita GDP. In fact, Egypt's per capita GDP is declining. So has ICT done a bad job in Egypt, or has it done a good job? This question has to be answered very clearly when we are looking at ICT development. Now, rituals. I think in most countries in the world we have rituals. Although we in South Asia believe we have more rituals than others. Rituals are certain practices that you perform, such as lighting a lamp, such as putting a flower, lighting a candle. We perform these rituals. Do we always know why we do it? Maybe, sometimes, yes, we know, sometimes in many contexts, we don't know. Many times, these are, the theory says, many anthropologists have gone into ritual theory and say, why do we perform them? There is an overtly rational reason for it. There is some explanation that we have in India, we light a lamp before any, if a conference was like this was being held in India, Siraj would have lit a lamp and he would have invited the chief guest to light a lamp. You ask anybody, most people won't have an idea what it is. They'll say, well, fire has to do with, it's very auspicious. So if you dig deeper into it, fire has to do with the 5 elements in the subcontinent that people refer to. It also has to do with our human origins. In many cases, rituals invoke the ancestors, by and large, in the subcontinent. So maybe some of you have seen this, maybe in movies. In South India in particular, before a meal, somebody, before they start the meal, they pour water in their hands and they will make a square around there, just with drops of water, a square around their plate. That is invoking the blessings of the ancestors. Not everybody does it, but many people do. Some people know why they're doing this because they have read the actual the theory behind it. Many people just do it. Now, what I found that rituals show up in systems implementations also. And you might ask, so what does this have to do with development or with ICT? Well, this is a very deep cultural issue. And it begins to play a role in systems implementations also. So, for example, a meeting for requirements analysis soon becomes a ritual. You show up, sit in the room, talk about requirements, have a coffee, write things down, go away. You meet again because you have to meet. If you're following the practices of SEI, the Software Engineering Institute, you have to follow certain practices. And they become very seriously ritualized. And I've seen this, in fact, I presented a paper at a conference about this. We have very detailed ethnographic data on this, where the ritualization soon dominates the entire process of implementation. The real meaning, if you want to, I have to problematize the real intention also, exactly what is the real intention. However, the project success or failure, if one says that's the real intention, that gets subverted. There is some other things going on in the background which are running the project. The ritual is in the systems implementation, the meetings, the reports, the